Keanu Reeves sat in his office looking out of the big glass window. The city below was full of flickering lights, cars rushing past, and people walking quickly, lost in their own worlds. No one seemed to notice each other, just moving through life without truly connecting. Keanu had everything: a successful career, money, and the love of fans all around the world. But deep inside, he never forgot what it felt like to be treated like he was invisible. That was why he had decided to build a hospital. Not just to donate money or put his name on a building, but to create a place where everyone, no matter how rich or poor, would be treated with kindness and dignity. He had trusted the people running the hospital to make sure it lived up to that vision. But now something was wrong. Official reports said everything was running smoothly, but Keanu had started receiving anonymous messages saying otherwise. People were complaining about being ignored, mistreated, and even turned away. He couldn't accept this. There was only one way to find out the truth. He had to go there himself. That evening, Keanu dressed simply. He put on an old black jacket, faded jeans, and grabbed his worn-out helmet. He hopped onto his black motorcycle and rode through the city, heading toward the hospital. Tonight, he wasn't a famous actor. He was just another man looking for help. When he arrived, he parked his motorcycle in the lot and walked inside through the large glass doors. No one recognized him. The man who had starred in action films, the man loved by millions, had become just another face in the crowd. And that was exactly what he wanted. He walked up to the front desk, where a tired-looking woman was typing on a computer. She didn't look up. Keanu stood there patiently, waiting. After a long moment, he finally spoke. "Good evening. I'd like to see a doctor." The receptionist finally looked up at him. Her eyes quickly scanned his simple clothes, and her face twisted slightly, as if she had already decided he wasn't important. "Name?" she asked, sounding bored. "Keanu." She raised an eyebrow but typed his name into the system anyway. "Do you have insurance?" she asked, her tone impatient. "I'd rather pay in cash." She sighed loudly and rolled her eyes. Then she tore a small slip of paper from the printer and handed it to him. "Wait your turn. It's going to take a while." Keanu took the paper without a word and walked to the waiting area. He sat down between an old man who looked like he was in pain and a mother holding a sick baby. The little boy was burning with fever, his tiny chest rising and falling too fast. His mother looked exhausted and terrified. The mother couldn't wait any longer. She stood up and hurried to the receptionist. "Please, my baby is very sick. He needs a doctor now," she begged. The receptionist didn't even glance up. "Ma'am, I told you already. You need to wait your turn." "But he's getting worse," the mother cried, desperation in her voice. The receptionist sighed, sounding annoyed. "If you're so worried, maybe you should take him to a public hospital. Here we follow the rules." Keanu frowned. He looked to his other side, where the elderly man was clutching his chest, his breathing shallow and uneven. A nurse walked past him without stopping. He called out weakly, but she only gave him a quick glance before saying, "Sir, I can't stop everything for every little pain. Just wait your turn." The old man groaned, bending forward slightly as if in more pain. Keanu felt his hands clench into fists. No one should be treated like this. Just then, a man in an expensive suit walked past the reception desk. He didn't need a number. He didn't need to wait. The staff smiled at him and immediately made way for him. "Dr. Emilio is expecting you, sir. You can go right in." Keanu watched the hypocrisy unfold. The rich were treated like kings, while those who needed help the most were ignored. His jaw tightened, but he took a deep breath. He needed to see more before taking action. After a few minutes, Keanu stood up and walked back to the front desk. "Excuse me," he said. The receptionist looked at him with clear irritation. "What?" Keanu gestured toward the mother with the sick baby and the old man struggling to breathe. "They seem to need urgent help. Are you sure nothing can be done?" The receptionist frowned. "I already told you. Everyone has to wait their turn. Those are the rules." Keanu was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes studying her. Then he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Rules can be broken when a life is at risk." The receptionist huffed. "And what makes you think you know more than the doctors?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He just smirked slightly, shook his head, and walked back to his seat. He had already seen enough. This hospital was not what he had envisioned. Something was deeply wrong and he was going to fix it. But Keanu didn't know yet that in just a few minutes, he was going to witness something so terrible that he wouldn't be able to just sit and watch any longer. It was time to act. The hospital was noisy and busy. Nurses rushed back and forth, trying to handle the overwhelming number of patients. But in the middle of all this chaos, one man walked like he was above it all, Dr. Emilio Vargas. He was tall with perfect hair and cold, sharp eyes. His white coat was spotless, and he held an expensive cup of coffee in his hand. He walked through the halls without acknowledging the patients around him. To him, they weren't people. They were just numbers. A desperate scream cut through the noise. "Doctor, please. My baby is burning up. He needs help now." The mother ran toward Dr. Emilio, holding her child tightly against her chest. Dr. Emilio stopped walking and slowly turned to look at her. His eyes lazily scanned her from head to toe. His face twisted with disgust, as if she were nothing more than an annoyance. He rolled his eyes, took a slow sip of coffee, and spoke. "If he's sick, then wait like everyone else. This hospital is not a daycare." The mother's face fell. She looked shocked at his cold words. "But he might be seriously ill." "He's getting weaker," she pleaded, her voice shaking. Dr. Emilio sighed and leaned slightly toward her. "Listen carefully. Do you think you're the only person with problems? If I stopped everything for every kid with a fever, this hospital would go bankrupt." Keanu, still sitting in the waiting area, felt his blood boil. His jaw tightened. His hands clenched. But on the outside, he remained calm. Inside, his anger was growing by the second. Dr. Emilio walked away as if nothing had happened. Two nurses nearby exchanged nervous glances but said nothing. Keanu noticed something important at that moment: fear. The staff knew what kind of man Dr. Emilio was, but none of them had the courage to stand up to him. The mother sat down, silently crying as she held her baby close. Keanu turned to the old man beside him, who was still clutching his chest, struggling to breathe. "Sir, are you okay?" Keanu asked gently. The old man forced a tired smile. "I've been through worse," he said weakly. "I just have to wait." Keanu had seen enough. He was done waiting. It was time to act. Keanu closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He had heard people talk about this before, but now he was seeing it with his own eyes. Something needed to change. A few minutes later, a young man walked into the hospital waiting room. His hand was bleeding a lot and he was pressing a cloth against it. His face showed that he was in pain and needed help. "Please, I need help," he said. The receptionist just nodded and told him to go to Dr. Emilio's office. Keanu leaned forward in his chair, watching closely. He wanted to see how the doctor would treat this patient. The young man stepped inside the doctor's office. But just a few seconds later, Dr. Emilio's loud, rude voice echoed through the hallway. "Are you serious? You came here for that?" he said, laughing. The hospital became quiet. The young man hesitated. "Doctor, it's bleeding a lot and it really hurts," he said. Dr. Emilio laughed again, but this time it was mean. "That's just a small cut, kid. Go home and put some alcohol on it." Keanu watched without showing any emotion. The young man stood there looking embarrassed. Dr. Emilio waved his hand. "There are people dying here, and you want me to waste my time on a little scratch?" The boy lowered his head and walked out, still bleeding, without getting any help. As he passed, Keanu stood up and gently took his arm. "Let me see your hand," he said. The young man looked at him, surprised. "Who are you?" Keanu gave him a small, kind smile. "Just someone who cares," he said. He took out a clean handkerchief from his pocket and helped the boy press it against his wound. From across the room, Dr. Emilio watched them. His face showed a mix of annoyance and amusement. He had no idea who Keanu really was. If he did, he would have been much more careful with his words. What Dr. Emilio didn't know was that among the many patients he treated so badly, one of them had the power to change everything. And that moment was coming very soon. The hospital was busy with people talking, walking quickly, and typing on computers. Keanu sat still, looking calm, but inside he was getting angry. He had seen enough. Dr. Emilio Vargas, the doctor in charge, acted like he was more important than everyone else. He didn't care about the patients. To him, they were just problems he had to deal with. He treated his job like it was annoying. But he had no idea who he was talking to. In this hospital, the name Keanu Reeves meant nothing to him. But that was about to change. After waiting a long time, Keanu's name was finally called. "Next patient," the receptionist said. She looked at the form but didn't ask for his last name. Keanu stood up slowly, took a deep breath, and walked toward Dr. Emilio's office. Inside, the doctor was sitting behind his desk, typing on his computer. He didn't even look up. The office was neat but felt cold and unfriendly. Without looking at Keanu, the doctor muttered, "So, what's the problem?" Keanu watched him for a moment before speaking. His voice was calm. "I've been feeling very tired and my muscles hurt a lot. I'd like a full checkup." Finally, Dr. Emilio looked up at Keanu. He glanced at Keanu's simple clothes, an old jacket, worn-out jeans, and frowned as if Keanu didn't belong there. Then he smirked and spoke in a rude tone. "Where are you from?" he asked. Keanu raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Dr. Emilio leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Because hospitals like this aren't for just anyone." Silence filled the room. Keanu didn't react. He had been judged before. He had heard rude comments and seen people underestimate him. But this was the first time someone treated him this way in a hospital that he himself had built. Dr. Emilio sighed, looking bored. "All right, let's get this over with." He picked up his stethoscope without any care, as if this was a waste of his time. "Take a deep breath," he said. Keanu did as he was told. The doctor barely listened before asking a few simple questions. He didn't even pay attention to the answers. In less than 3 minutes, Dr. Emilio was already writing on a piece of paper. He tossed it onto the desk and said, "You don't have anything serious. Just take some painkillers and rest." Keanu looked at the paper, then back at the doctor. "That's it?" he asked. Dr. Emilio sighed loudly, clearly annoyed. "That's it." Keanu crossed his arms. "But what if it's something serious? You didn't do any tests or ask about my medical history." Dr. Emilio let out a short, dry laugh. "Look, buddy, I see a lot of patients every day. I can tell when someone has a real problem and when they're just tired." Keanu stayed quiet for a moment. "Then tell me exactly what's wrong with me," he said. The doctor rolled his eyes. "I already told you you're fine. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have more important patients to see." Keanu didn't move. His eyes stayed on the doctor. "More important patients?" he repeated. Dr. Emilio sighed again, clearly tired of the conversation. "Yes, people who actually need my help." And that was when Keanu truly understood. This wasn't just a rude doctor. Dr. Emilio actually believed that some lives were worth more than others. This wasn't just a bad attitude, it was wrong. Keanu stood up slowly and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned and gave the doctor one last look. His eyes were calm but serious. Dr. Emilio noticed and raised an eyebrow. "What?" he asked, irritated. Keanu gave a small smile, but it wasn't friendly. "Thank you for your time, doctor. I hope you treat your next patients with more respect than you treated me." Dr. Emilio laughed, shaking his head. "Oh yeah? And who are you to tell me what to do?" Keanu didn't answer. He simply turned and walked out. But before he could take more than a few steps, a nurse gently grabbed his arm. "Sir, I'm so sorry about what happened there," she whispered. She looked around as if she was afraid someone might hear her. Keanu looked at her curiously. "Is it always like this?" The nurse lowered her head, ashamed. "Yes, but no one dares to say anything. He's untouchable." Keanu stayed silent for a moment, thinking. He already knew what he had to do. But before making his move, he needed to gather more proof. Keanu had seen enough. This wasn't just a bad doctor. This was a broken system that needed to be fixed. And he was about to do something that no one expected. Keanu walked down the hospital hallway. His face looked calm, but inside he was upset. What he saw that night was not just one bad doctor. It was a whole hospital that didn't care about poor people. Now, he understood why people said this hospital ignored and mistreated them. But he needed more proof before he did anything. He couldn't just react based on feelings. He had to be sure. He had to gather all the facts before he made his next move. Keanu decided to look around. He went to a quiet part of the hospital where workers took their breaks. The nurses, receptionists, and other workers knew what was really going on. They were the ones who saw how patients were treated every day. If anyone had the truth, it was them. As he walked past a slightly open door, he heard some nurses talking. Their voices were low, but he could sense the frustration in their words. "Dr. Emilio embarrassed another patient today," one nurse said. "Again?" Another nurse sighed. "He always does that, but no one complains. The bosses protect him." Keanu's eyes narrowed. A younger nurse spoke. "If anyone complains, he gets revenge. He cuts their work hours, gives them bad shifts, and even writes bad reports about them." The nurses kept talking, but one thing stood out to Keanu. Dr. Emilio was protected by the hospital bosses. Keanu's jaw tightened. This wasn't just about one bad doctor. It was something much bigger. If the people in charge protected Dr. Emilio, then the whole system was broken. It wasn't a mistake. It was allowed to happen. Keanu stepped forward. The nurses stopped talking and looked at him, surprised to see a patient there. They didn't recognize him, but they could tell he wasn't just any patient. "I'm sorry," Keanu said calmly. "I didn't mean to listen in." The nurses looked at each other, unsure. Then one finally asked, "Did you hear everything?" Keanu nodded. "Yes, and I want to know more about what's happening here." They hesitated. "Who are you?" another nurse asked. Keanu didn't answer right away. It wasn't the right time to tell them. "I'm just someone who believes that people should be treated with kindness." The first nurse bit her lip. After a moment she finally spoke. "This isn't just about Dr. Emilio," she said. Keanu folded his arms and listened. The bosses only care about numbers. They don't care if people suffer, as long as the reports say the hospital is doing well. "And Dr. Emilio?" Keanu asked. "He makes the hospital look good because he rushes through patients. If someone complains, he ignores them. If a patient needs a test, he skips it to save time," another nurse added. Keanu felt his stomach tighten. Now he understood. This wasn't just about one doctor's ego. The whole system allowed him to act this way. If Keanu wanted to fix things, firing one doctor wouldn't be enough. He had to change everything. After talking to the staff, Keanu walked back to the waiting room. He looked at the people still there. An old woman sat clutching her purse. She had been waiting for hours. The young man Dr. Emilio humiliated was still there, holding a dirty cloth against his injured hand, too scared to ask for help again. A mother with a sick baby sat in the same spot, rocking her child. She was exhausted and crying quietly. Keanu's chest tightened. He couldn't let this continue. He had seen enough. It was time to act. Before leaving, Keanu walked up to a security guard. "I'd like to speak to the hospital boss," he said. The guard frowned. "Why?" Keanu smiled slightly. "He's going to want to hear me out." The guard hesitated, then picked up the phone and made a call. A few minutes later, Keanu was taken to a big meeting room. Inside, the hospital's top boss sat waiting. He was an older man with gray hair and a serious face. He crossed his arms. "What do you want?" he asked, sounding annoyed. Keanu walked forward and sat at the table, staying calm. He looked straight at the man and finally spoke. "My name is Keanu Reeves." The room went completely silent. The boss froze. His face turned pale. The guards in the room looked at each other, confused. Keanu crossed his arms. "And I own this hospital." The boss swallowed hard. Keanu's voice was steady. "It looks like we have a big problem here. And I'm going to fix it." The boss felt a chill go through him. He knew things were about to change. The room stayed silent. The hospital boss, who was used to looking at numbers and reports, felt his breath grow heavy. He never expected something like this. "Keanu Reeves?" he whispered. "The owner of the hospital?" Keanu gave a small nod. "Yes." The security guards exchanged looks. A nurse in the room covered her mouth in shock. The boss tried to stay calm. He adjusted his collar. "Well, Mr. Reeves, if we had known you were here, we would have given you better care." Keanu's eyes narrowed. His face turned cold. "And why would I need special treatment?" The boss swallowed hard. I just meant." "You meant that some people get treated better than others?" Keanu cut him off. His voice was firm. The boss fell silent. Keanu leaned forward slightly. "I saw everything. I saw how poor people are treated here. I saw doctors ignoring people who needed help. I saw Dr. Emilio humiliating a mother and refusing to help an injured man. I saw our employees afraid to speak up because they know they will be punished." The boss started sweating. "Mr. Reeves, I understand your concern, but we have to be realistic. Dr. Emilio is one of our best doctors. He keeps the hospital running smoothly." Keanu raised his hand. "Numbers?" he asked sharply. The boss shut his mouth. "You think numbers are more important than people's lives?" The boss had nothing to say. Keanu's voice was strong. "If this hospital only looks good on paper but treats people badly, then it has completely failed." A nurse who had been standing quietly finally spoke up. "He's right. Everyone knows what Dr. Emilio does, but we're too scared to report him. We've tried, but they always silence us." Keanu took a deep breath. "Not anymore," he said. "Things are going to change. And I will make sure of it." Keanu turned to her, his face serious and full of respect. "That ends today," he said. The hospital administrator stood still, feeling the power of Keanu's words. Keanu slowly stood up, his presence strong. He looked at one of the security guards and said, "Bring Dr. Emilio here now." A few minutes later, the doors opened. Dr. Emilio walked in with confidence, his face full of pride. He frowned, confused. "Why was I called here so late?" he asked, looking around. Then he saw Keanu Reeves. He narrowed his eyes. "Who is this?" he asked the administrator. The administrator hesitated before saying, "He owns the hospital." Dr. Emilio's face went pale. "What?" he whispered. Keanu crossed his arms and looked right at him. "So, you're the famous Dr. Emilio." The doctor was still trying to understand what was happening. But Keanu didn't wait for him to answer. "I saw everything," Keanu said. "I saw how you treat patients, how you ignore sick people, how you make fun of those who need help." Dr. Emilio forced a laugh, but he sounded nervous. "Look, I'm just doing my job. I'm not here to babysit people." Keanu leaned in slightly. "Your job is to help people, not treat them like trash." Dr. Emilio's smile disappeared. He was getting angry. "I'm a great doctor. My numbers show it." Keanu shook his head. "If you are so good, then why is everyone afraid of you?" Dr. Emilio had no answer. Keanu turned to the administrator. "Dr. Emilio is fired. Right now." The room went silent. Dr. Emilio stepped forward, shocked. "You can't do this." Keanu stared at him. "I can." "And I did." Dr. Emilio let out an angry growl, but the security guards were already standing beside him, ready to take him out. Before he was removed, Keanu gave him one last warning. "If I hear that you are working at another hospital and treating people badly again, I will make sure you never work as a doctor again." Dr. Emilio was dragged out of the room, embarrassed and defeated. After he was gone, Keanu turned to the hospital administrator. "The changes start now." The employees in the room looked at him with hope. "I want a way for people to report bad behavior without giving their names," Keanu said. "I want every worker here to learn how to be kind and take care of patients properly. And I want every patient to be treated with respect, no matter if they are rich or poor." A nurse smiled, tears in her eyes. "Can we really do this?" Keanu smiled back. "Yes, and we will do it together." The administrator finally gave up and nodded. A new beginning had started at the hospital. In the next few days, the hospital felt different. The hallways were brighter. Patients who were once ignored now got the care they needed. Employees who used to be afraid now felt happy and motivated. The mother with the sick baby who was treated badly before came back and finally got the care she needed. The young man with the hurt hand was treated kindly. The hospital staff, seeing these changes, felt proud of their work. A few weeks later, Keanu visited the hospital again to see how things were going. He walked through the halls watching everything. As he was about to leave, a small child ran up to him and held his hand. Keanu looked down and saw a 5-year-old boy with bright eyes. "Are you Keanu Reeves, the owner of the hospital?" the boy asked. Keanu smiled and knelt down. "Yes, that's me." The boy grinned shyly. "Thank you for helping people. The doctors are nice now." Keanu felt a lump in his throat. He gently patted the boy's head. Taking care of people is what really matters. He stood up and looked at the hospital, glowing under the night sky. His dream was coming true. Kindness and respect were free, but without them the cost was too high. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more exciting stories filled with adventure, mystery, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories coming and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.